Welcome to the channel. In this video, we build this mini tool chest, which is something that I've been thinking about and planning for about 2 years now, and the whole idea is that I can woodwork from anywhere. The other benefit to this is I like making small projects and small details, so now I have a setup that is dedicated to that. The other thing about this build is I did it completely by hand, or I guess I would say 99% by hand. The only power tool I used was a power drill. So, let's dive in. Of course, every great project has to start with a plan. Now, I did draw this out on paper and think through it on paper, but I ended up throwing most of this away and just kind of flying by the seat of my pants with this build. Now, of course, I had to pick the most difficult lumber, and I don't mean grain-wise, but I picked this long, about 3-inch thick piece of ash that I wanted to be 3 different panels. So that meant that I needed to resaw it, not once, but twice. By the time I got to resawing the second panel, I did remember that I have a bigger panel saw, which I don't know if it really sped up the project at all because I think that's a crosscut saw. I'm not certain, but it worked, and we did end up with 3 beautiful pieces of ash, which I am super excited to use. Planing all of these boards flat and square was actually really satisfying. To go from using a rough scrub plane to a final finish past number 4 was just a lot of fun, and I had a blast doing it. It did create a lot of shavings, which gave me a good idea. I am going to save all of the shavings from this project into one big garbage bag because I want to see how much waste is actually created going from rough stock to finished stock and a final project. So I'll show you guys at the end of the video what that looks like. With the panels done, it was time to focus on the front, back, sides, whatever of the boxes, and I'm punishing myself again by picking this big piece of sapele that needs to be chopped into a bunch of different boards. I guess I shouldn't say I'm punishing myself. So this lumber actually means something to me because it was gifted to me by friends. So the ash came from my friend down in West Virginia, and the sapele came from my friend Jeff Warshafsky with Reed Plains. He's the one that makes all those different inventions and sells them through Wood by Rights shop. So I wanted to use these materials in this project because they meant something to me. So it was worth the punishment because sentimental value to me means a lot more than just buying a board from, I don't know, Lowe's or something like that. But after a lot of cutting, I got all of the boards that I needed from this piece of sapele with some scrap left over that I'm going to try to use for the various tool holders that are going to be in this box. Planing everything flat and square gave me a good sense of accomplishment again because it was a lot of fun. Instead of showing you guys all of the planing that I had to do, I'm going to show you all of the cleanup I had to do because my bench would get so full of shavings that I would have to stop and clear the bench or stop and sweep the floor. The other thing I want to point out is when I say flat and square, I mean like flat-ish and square-ish. I don't always go for like perfectly dead flat and perfectly dead square all of the time. But on that note, I do want to give a shout out to the Veritas shooting plane because I love this plane. The next step is we were diving into dovetails, and I tried the tape method, and I guess I just want to say that it didn't work out like I thought it would. All of the cleanup from the tape like made it not worth it to me because of the benefits. They didn't outweigh all of the cleanup that I had to do. The other thing that I tried was chiseling out the waste because I know some people are big fans of that. Typically, I reach for my new concept saw and cut it out, but I wanted to try chiseling out the waste, and everything went really well except for this one part.
All right, I got a little bit of a weird situation here that I haven't really had happen before, like not to this extreme. So you see this piece right here, okay? Watch. It tore out like this gigantic chunk. Now, I've had it happen in like little pieces, but like this is a lot. Look at that. Look at that big gap right there that it just tore out. So, luckily, it looks like there's a little bitty strip of wood, if you can see that right there. So it looks like it's going to be okay, but man, I've never had that big of a chunk tear out like that. And then the other thing it did is it took this chip too. That right there. Popped out along with it. So I have no idea.
For those of you that are new to the channel, I should have pointed this out. I am not one to teach you dovetails. Dovetails are semi-new to me, and I definitely need a lot more practice. These dovetails came out okay. I'm very happy with them. They are far from perfect, but I am happy with them. I did make an error, though, that caused problems later on that I had to fix. Is when I was laying out the pins, the boards weren't like square to each other. They weren't lined up. They were cattywampide, which made the entire frame be cattywampide. But I am not going back to the beginning and remilling all of this material, recutting the dovetails, none of that. I made it work out. You saw the final project already, and it ended up okay. There is one tool that I want to highlight that I love for dovetails and getting into the corners of things. It is a Japanese wood block or print block or flat carving chisel, and it is awesome. The blade is very, very thin. It gets very, very sharp, and it does a fantastic job. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. I highly recommend looking into them. Cutting out the grooves for the panels was a lot of fun too. I actually did it like a half mortise, I guess. I treated these like mortises and chopped out the waste that way because they were stopped. So it's not like I could use a rabbet plane or a plow plane or anything like that to cut these grooves. But it was a lot of fun. It did create a lot, a lot of chips, a lot of waste. If you wear Crocs in the shop, then you know how it feels to get chips in your shoes, and yeah, that's all I'm going to say. But everything turned out really well, and I am happy with these grooves. They weren't perfect, obviously, but I am very happy with how they turned out. Next, I cut all of the panels to size, and I wanted to do something fancy in the corners just to have a little bit of fun with it, but it did not work out. So no worries, we're going to cover those with some feet later. After this, we move on to fitting the vise, and for this, I picked a piece of Bacote. This piece of Bacote I've had since I started woodworking, so it's sentimental to me in that way. Also, if you didn't know, I am completely obsessed with Bacote. I mean, look at the shavings off of this shooting plane. They are just absolutely gorgeous. Everything with this vise install was pretty straightforward. The only thing that was rather annoying is the Forstner bits required for the vise posts is 11/30 seconds and 13/30 seconds, which I don't have. So I just went with the size closest that I had. I wasn't buying a special Forstner bit for this. The only other issue I ran into is I should have drilled these holes and installed the vise before I glued and assembled the bottom of the box together, because it was kind of difficult to get those screws drilled. But everything worked out. The vise works perfectly fine. It is time for a confession. So the magnetic removable workbench top was not in my initial ideas in planning out this project. What I was going to do was cut out sides of the case and have storage so things could slide in from the outside. But I didn't like the idea of having all the holes on the outside of the case for like the clamps to go and the shooting board to go and that kind of stuff. So I came up with the idea of using magnets so that way the workbench can be taken out. I can store stuff underneath. The sides of the box are going to hold it in place, and so are the magnets. So what I did is I just tried to line the magnets up as best as possible so that way when the workbench is in place, it'll stay in place. Now, after this, I needed to do a lot of cleanup. The dovetails weren't cleaned up. The boards weren't flush. None of that stuff. I did all of that off camera because I wanted to just, like, relax and use a hand plane and not have to worry about the camera. But there was a lot of material, and we're filling up that trash bag even more. After all of the cleanup was done, I then decided to cut little tabs out of the back of the workbench so I could put a piece of leather in there to serve as the way that I can lift the workbench in and out of the case. As I was doing this, I realized that I had installed the magnets incorrectly, meaning they were not magnetizing to each other. They were actually rejecting each other because I couldn't get the workbench top to stay in place. So what I had to do was use a drop of acetone. I use these little syringes, which are actually really handy to have in the shop. Just one drop of acetone in each one of those magnet holes. Popped the magnets out, drilled it out so it was fresh, and then re-glued the magnets back in. Now you might say, Jamie, you're stupid, that's a rookie mistake, blah, blah, blah. And I'm here to tell you that not only did I do it once, but I did it twice. So after taking the first magnets out, I had to take the second magnets out because I also installed those incorrectly. But third time's a charm, and we finally got the bench installed with the magnets installed the correct way. Back to a previous mistake. If you remember, I tried to be all fancy and do some cool joinery, whatever, on the bottom of the case. It didn't work out. So what I'm doing now is I'm cutting up some pieces of ebony. They're going to serve as feet for this. I do have to point out, too, that the number 3 size low angle from Veritas, I use a lot. That question came up in the Veritas Tool Nerds group, and I just want to say I use that plane a lot. I love it, and it was perfect for this application. So what I did is I cut these down and then taped them to the bottom of the box to glue them up. And if you remember, this case was a little cattywampus. So the one piece, I actually took and sanded it over and over again until it leveled out the case so it wasn't cattywampus on the bottom, and it will sit flat, and it actually worked out really well. Here is another application for that Japanese print block chisel. Anytime it's any kind of like fine detail or cleaning up anything, like I tend to reach for that chisel a lot. Even though I have a lot of good quality chisels, I just reach for this, and it's not an expensive chisel at all. So I, again, highly recommend them. After this, it was drilling all of the dog holes into the workbench. I made this block like years ago, and I use it a lot. And sometimes it's just easier to put the item in there to see if it fits well, or if you need a little bit more of a loose fit or a tighter fit or whatever. So I highly recommend making one of these blocks with just the different drill sizes in it whenever you need to fit something. And then after that, it was just drilling a bunch of holes into the workbench. The clamps that hold this chest onto a table are just fence clamps, and what I had to do is I needed to cut the handles down so that way they would fit underneath the workbench. I then went around the sides of the box and drilled holes right above the feet, so that way when you clamp, the clamping pressure is going against the foot of the workbench and not like to have an air gap between the chest and whatever table you have it clamped to. Now I'm applying a coat of Glancy's oil because it gives the wood a little bit of protection while I'm still working on everything, and I just really wanted to see what the grain was going to look like because I love this ash, and I wanted to see how the grain was going to pop out when I applied some oil. So that's why I'm finishing ahead of time. I did not apply this oil to anywhere that's going to be accepting any kind of wood glue. So basically just finishing the outsides, finishing the workbench, finishing the sides, that kind of stuff. After this, it was making all of the mini tool holders. Now, I'm assuming if you found this video, you are a woodworker, and you can probably look at those mini tool holders and know how I built them. So I'm just going to show you some glamour shots. I might make them separate videos, like the little stone holder, the chisel holder, maybe the spoke shave holder. I think those would make pretty cool separate videos. But some of them were really simple, like the router plane, the shoulder plane, the edge trimming plane. Those are pretty straightforward. All of the tool holders was basically just a lot of sawing, chiseling. I used my carving tools. For the mallet, I did drill out a lot of the waste and then carve out the rest, but I had a blast just making every single one of those holders. So the next part was laying everything into the chest and gluing it down. Now this was really a simple process because I had laid all of this out ahead of time, and when I was planning where all the tools were going to go and building their holders, that designed the layout for me. So it was adding glue, adding some super glue, sticking everything in place. For the bottom of the chest, I am not making individual holders yet. What I'm going to do for now is just use foam to kind of keep things in place. I might add some tool holders later, but really it's just storage. I also kind of ran out of time. The intro and the outro were recorded while I was camping, and I needed to finish this so I could record those. It was like a goal of mine. So maybe I'll come back to the bottom of the chest later. Now it was time to install all of the hardware, and it did not go exactly as planned. The handle that I had initially picked out for this was going to be this really cool, I think hand-forged, like antique one I got from an antique store, but it only had 2 places for screws, and I didn't feel that it was going to be strong enough, and I was worried that it was going to, like, fall out, basically. So I ran to Ace Hardware, just grabbed one of those standard black handles, and I used bolts to hold them in place, bolts with a washer and a nut, just because I felt like it was a little bit more secure for how heavy this chest was going to be. Now the hinges, admittedly, I thought that they were butt hinges. I thought I was just going to screw them onto the bottom and call it a day, but they were actually the ones that you had to chisel out or route out little grooves for them to sit into, and this was the first time that I ever used those types of hinges. If you notice, the chest has a gap, so I think I installed them incorrectly. What I did is I took one side and chiseled down the thickness of one side of that hinge on both sides of the box. Maybe I needed to go double, I don't know. If you guys have installed these hinges before, feel free to let me know down below. After getting the hinges installed, it did hold the lid in place really well. These are those 90-degree stopped hinges, but I was worried that once I added all of the tools, there would be a little bit too much weight. So what I decided to do was add a chain. It worked out really well. The chain holds a lot of that support, and with all the tools installed, it's pretty stable. To hold the chest closed, I decided to go with these spring hinges, which actually worked out really well. I didn't make any mistakes with them at all, and it was perfect. Once I installed all of the tools, I realized I made a grave error. So I had about 2.5 inches on the top where the handles of the tools could rise. That's why the shooting plane is on its side, and I had to design certain holders certain ways to make sure they didn't rise above, and I checked it for every single one of the tools, except for the plow plane. Now, that holder is already installed, so what I would have to do is chisel out that holder and replace it with something else later. And again, I'm out of time because I'm going camping, and it's just going to be what it's going to be for now. I'll deal with it later. What I'm going to do is just store the plow plane separate, and then when I open the chest, I'll just put the plow plane in place in the meantime. Again, eventually, this is something that I'll go back and work on more. The final step is the finishing process. You saw that I used 1 coat of Glancy's oil, but then I am using 3 different coats of shellac in 2 different pound cuts. And I'm curious to see if you guys can guess which pound cuts those are, so let us know down below. If you do use shellac, I highly recommend one of these scientific mixers. My buddy Lou gave this to me, and what it is it's a magnet that goes inside of the jar that spins and mixes it up for you. So this is good not only for when you are making shellac, but also if your shellac has sat for a while, you can set it on this, it can mix it up for you so it's ready to go. For the inside of the chest, I also use shellac, but I only did 1 coat, and I used a paintbrush to apply it. This is not an area of the chest that's going to be like touched, like it's not like the outside or anything like that, so I didn't really care that I was applying it with the brush or how heavy the coat was or anything like that. I just applied it and had fun doing that. It was kind of fun to just sit there and, you know, paint the finish on. And with that, the mini tool briefcase is completed, and I am very happy with how it came out. Is it perfect? Heck no. There are gaps, there are extra holes. I didn't account for wood movement on the tops and the bottom of the chest. I have to fix the plow plane holder. My logo isn't perfect, so on, so on, and so on. The reason I say that is because I know that we see perfect build videos all the time on YouTube, and I understand wanting to strive to have perfect projects, but I don't want that to take away from having fun. There is a level of hobby woodworking where things aren't perfect and you just build to have fun, and that's exactly what this was for me. So just keep that in mind. I am going to try to get more build videos out to you guys, but just an example on this one is it was 30 hours of footage and 1.32 terabytes of data. So that is pretty significant. If you don't know, I operate Plain Wellness and I have a full-time job that pays my bills. YouTube is not a full-time job, but I will try to do more build videos to show you guys that woodworking doesn't have to be perfect. And the last thing I want to show you guys is the full bag of shavings that were created from this project alone. And as a celebration while we were camping, we did burn those, and it was just a lot of fun. So I'm kind of glad that I collected all of those. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, any comments, anything like that, feel free to let us know down below, and have a good day.